everyone, and welcome to our latest installment of Joel and the Genius. A ton of stuff has happened over the last month. Football season has started. Fantasy teams are battling for bragging rights. Fitzpatrick, Mahomes, Le'Veon Bell, Khalil Mack are only the few names that have been on our minds. Baseball playoffs will be starting soon, and we most certainly have our issues with the way things have shaped up so far. A month is a long time to wait and to hold on to what we've been thinking about this whole entire time. So before we get into the top five for this episode, Mike, I wanted to talk about our own personal fantasy teams. Currently, right now, we both stand at 2-1. I'm in second place. You are in third place. We previously made sure that I'd let everybody else know about how that was going. So how do you feel like your team is going so far, according to your own advice and maybe some tips that you would have thought of thinking about that?
I like my team. I like my draft. I like the way my draft went for the most part. I believe I followed my tips, and I think my team is sitting pretty. Not everybody has shown up yet, but that's the way drafts work. Guys aren't going to produce first week. Don't expect everybody to blow up in week 1 or 2. These things are built for the long haul.
Have you had any types of topsy-turvy types of things happen where you feel like your lineup has been, myself personally, I got a little scared when Jay Ajayi sat out last week, but I think he's going to be okay. That's the one that has me worried. Obviously, tight end situations, things we'll talk about in our top five. Did anything really stand out to you as far as your lineup goes, or things that you really caught your eye?
Well, I'm in multiple leagues. In my league of record, the league that we're in together, the most important league for me. I've been fortunate. Knock on wood, no major injuries, no major surprises. I do have Marlon Mack, for example, who hasn't had really an opportunity to get on the field yet, and so I haven't had an opportunity to see what he could do yet. So there's some guys I'm still trying to be patient with, but no real shakeups.
Top five, what to do as your fantasy season rolls along. Have you been patient with your draft picks? Number one on the list.
I have, and hopefully you have too. And I'm going to tell you why. We're going to go back to last year for a second. Alvin Kamara finished the season the number 3 running back in football. Alvin Kamara, after the first 2 weeks of football, had a combined 9.2 points in standard leagues. In week 3, he had 42 total yards. The only reason he was even a viable fantasy option in week 3 is because he happened to have a receiving touchdown. Week 4 is when he blew up and never looked back. Alvin Kamara is a monster. Everybody knows it. But if you had him last year, if you drafted him last year and you expected him to blow up right away and you didn't wait for that week 4 monster game, you lost out on the number 3 running back in football way too soon.
So number 2 on the list has me slightly confused. You talk about being patient, but now you're talking about working the waiver wire. What exactly does that mean?
Good point. I know. It sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I tell you, be patient, then I tell you to work the waiver wire in the very next breath. We're going to start with injuries. Maybe you have Jimmy Garoppolo. Maybe you have Greg Olsen. Now you have holes in your lineup. You're going to have to work the waiver wire, fill these holes. Where you start, maybe with the guy who is filling in for these players. Now, the 2 examples I just gave, Jimmy Garoppolo, Greg Olsen, they're backups, maybe not so much. But generally speaking, if a guy goes down, the first place to look is at his backup. Who's the next guy up? Who's going to get that opportunity? And is this somebody you want to have on your team? Is he a fantasy viable option? So you're going to want to check the waiver wires if you have any injuries to fill. There's also going to be situations where guys got a heavier workload than expected early in the season. An example of that would be Phillip Lindsay. Nobody expected Phillip Lindsay to come out of the gate getting 16, 17 carries. Everybody expected this to be the Royce Freeman show. So when you see in week 1 that Phillip Lindsay is obviously in the Denver Broncos plans, or in New York, you've got Quincy Enunwa. Last year it was all about Robbie Anderson. Now all of a sudden Quincy Enunwa is showing he's the one getting all the targets. He's the one getting all the catches. He's the guy to own. You see a situation like that, yes, I want to be patient to the best of my ability, but if I have a spot on my roster that I can drop somebody, I want to snatch up a guy like Phillip Lindsay, who I know is going to get the opportunity. A guy like Quincy Enunwa, who is proven he's going to get the opportunity.
Interesting. Now, brings us to number 3 and picking out particular individuals and their players, chasing points. Talk to me about chasing points and why is that a bad idea moving on in further weeks in the season?
Well, when it comes to points, every season, there's a guy who goes out there and has week 1 or week 2 a blow-up monster game. Everybody rushes the waiver wire to get this guy. You use your waiver priority, and the guy does nothing for the rest of the season. Give you an example. Last year, Mike Gillislee goes out in week 1. He has 65 yards and 3 touchdowns for the New England Patriots. Gives him 22.5 points. Anybody who drafted him as a sleeper is bragging, talking junk in your face. Oh, what a steal I got. Anybody who did, any leagues where he went undrafted, guys are rushing out, using their waiver for him. But again, look at the numbers. He had 3 touchdowns for his 22 points. How often is a guy going to have 3 touchdowns? The top running backs, the Ezekiel Elliott's, the Le'Veon Bells, 3 touchdown games are rare for them. Multiple 3 touchdown games in a single season are rare for those guys. So how often is a guy like Mike Gillislee going to do it? So don't look at the numbers. Don't look at just the points. Finishing the Mike Gillislee story, 3 touchdowns in week 1, 8 touchdowns for the season. Now, he did only end up playing 8 games, but in those 8 games combined, he had 47.3 points in standard leagues. That's a 5.9 point average for somebody everybody had to have after that one big game. And this happens every year, so don't let it happen to you. I'm going to give you an example from this year. Will Disley. Now, I can't promise you anything, but let's look at what happened. Will Disley goes out there in week 1. He has 100 yards, 100-plus yards. He has 2 touchdowns. Everybody rushes the waiver wire to grab him. In week 2, he had a touchdown that saved his fantasy week. But yards, he was a little bit back down to earth. Week 3, I want to say he finished somewhere with, 13, 15 yards maybe. Don't rush out and snatch somebody up for one big game. Look at the big picture.
This big picture that you're talking about really makes to looking who's getting touches, who's getting the ball the most. You talked about Allen Robinson earlier on point number 2. He's going to be seeing the ball. How much more in depth are you looking at a team's lineup and roster for these touches? And point number 4 on what are they going to get? How's that going to make a difference?
Touches and targets are a key stat. And what I'm looking for when it comes to touches and targets, and what I mean by touches and targets, for a running back, it's how many times is he touching the ball? How many carries is he getting, plus how many receptions is he getting? The 2 numbers combined for how many times he's touched the ball in a game. For wide receivers, they don't tend to run the ball, so it's more about targets. How many times is the quarterback throwing the ball at that player? When it comes to a running back, you want to see him touching the ball 15 or more times a game. I mean, for an elite running back, you're looking 20 plus. But, you're not getting elite running backs off the waiver wire. So the reality is, if you want to look at a guy, try to find your number 2 running back or a flex option. If you're looking for a number 3 wide receiver or a flex option, you're looking for a running back who's getting 15 or more touches a game consistently, or a wide receiver who's getting 7 or more touches a game consistently. This is week in and week out, at least 7 targets. Week in and week out, at least 15 touches. If they're not getting the consistent 15 or consistent 7, the other thing to look for is the increase. Maybe this running back didn't get 15 every week, but he had 8 in this first week. Then in the next week he had 10. Then he has 13. Now he has 15. This is a guy who's on the rise. And particularly if he's doing more and more with that opportunity. If you see a guy getting more opportunity, that's a good thing. you see a guy getting the opportunity and doing something with it, that's a grab him right away.
Where do you rank this opportunity, though, for particular players? Let's say as a tight end, who's going to be the starting tight end? And we look at the Tennessee Titans situation. Or on another team where you have like Tariq Cohen, okay, is your second string running back against Jordan Howard, where he's going to get the touches. Where does the comparison lie and, the strength of these players?
Well, some of it's a crapshoot. With your tight end question, for example, I mean, tight end is such a thin position to begin with. If you've never heard of the guy, you might want to wait to see what he does before you go rushing out to grab him. Again, the backup tight end for the Tennessee Titans, the backup tight end for the Carolina Panthers. I don't even know who the backup tight end for the Carolina Panthers is. Yeah, he's not a guy you're going to want to, go own. There's probably better options on the waiver wire. Play the matchups in those situations. In the other situation, like a Jordan Howard, for example, know who the handcuff is. Know who the backup is. Tariq Cohen is not the handcuff to Jordan Howard. Tariq Cohen is his own standalone flex option. And in today's football, a lot of teams have this. If you have a guy who's a third down back, Pittsburgh has a similar situation with their rookie, Niles Hines. Similar situation. He is the third down change of pace receiving back. He is not a guy that they're going to give the ball more time, give him more touches. If Jordan Howard gets hurt, Tariq Cohen's role does not change. He will get the ball the same number of times he's getting the ball right now, which makes him a flex option. Jordan Howard's real handcuff is Benny Cunningham, who is the actual backup. Now, the funny thing is, the third string running back, sometimes these guys aren't even active. A lot of times they're not even they're in street clothes on game day. But if Jordan Howard gets hurt this week, I promise you, Benny Cunningham gets the touches next week.
Which brings us to our last and final point for our top five for today on really looking on how your roster and teams are going to shake up. Being proactive and not reactive when it comes to filling those holes on your roster and making sure what's going to happen. What do you think about that one?
Most importantly, if you're streaming, you want to try to be as proactive as you can. And actually, it goes back to working the waiver wire. Another point I should have made back when we talked about working the waiver wire, double dip the waiver wire. So many teams, so many owners, fantasy owners, they look at waivers on Tuesday, after the games. They see who they got on Wednesday, any positions they didn't fill. Maybe they fill with people who cleared waivers on Wednesday, and then you don't look again until the next week. It's really important to look at waivers again Friday and Saturday, and maybe even Sunday morning before the games start, when before guys are back on waivers for the week. For two big reasons. First of all, there's always some fool in your league that drops somebody that they had no business dropping. You've been that fool. I've been that fool. We've all done it. Everybody does it. You got to check and see who's doing it. The perfect time to do that is on, like I said, Friday. You're checking, you see who got dropped. Since half of your league doesn't look until the following Tuesday, you now have that advantage. Maybe somebody with higher waiver priority isn't paying attention, and you could sneak in and steal that guy that they dropped that they had no business dropping. The other part of double dipping the waiver wire brings us back to the point we were on now is if you're streaming, say you're streaming defenses. A lot of people stream defenses. You're streaming tight ends. You lost Greg Olsen, and now you're in that position where you're stuck streaming tight ends. Obviously, you need to start with this week. Get this week's lineup set. Make sure you have a matchup you're comfortable with, a guy you're comfortable going with this week. But then look at next week. If your guy that you currently have does not have a matchup you want anything to do with, you're streaming quarterbacks, and all of a sudden you look and you got the Rams coming up, you don't want this, especially a streaming option up against a team like the Rams or the Vikings. So See who else is out there. See who's on that waiver wire. What quarterback, what waiver wire quarterback has a nice matchup next week that you could snatch up now before the big waiver rush of Tuesday next week when everybody who's streaming a quarterback is out there looking for that guy.
Now we're talking about strictly waiver wire. Being proactive, is it too early in this season to make a trade with what you've got lingering around on your bench, or perhaps something that's on your roster that you might want to get rid of?
Never too early to trade. Never too early to try to improve your team. Trading is key. Trading. This is the perfect time.
You say it's key, but you think don't think it's too early to trade?
It's not. In fact, this is the time to look for the buy low options.
Okay.
David Johnson has done nothing through 3 weeks. David Johnson is a monster. Now, David Johnson is on a bad offense. And top running backs don't tend to come from bad offenses. But a running back with that much talent, who's that active in the passing game, who can turn any play into a touchdown on any given moment, is going to get his numbers eventually. And I promise you, a guy drafted as the number 4 running back, unless he gets hurt, is going to finish at worst a top-end RB2, low-end RB1.
What would you be willing to sacrifice at this point in the season for, say, a pick like that?
Well, again, you want to start low. You're trying to buy low.
Right.
You want to see if this owner that owns him is frustrated enough to give him.
You're the owner that has David Johnson that you want to see if you can get something better for him.
Oh, I'm not giving up David Johnson unless I can get an Ezekiel Elliott or
so it's
one of the guys that I had above him to begin with, because I do believe this guy is going to get his when all is said and done.
It's a like for a like is what you're looking for.
You're trying to get a guy like David Johnson who hasn't lived up to his potential yet. Or you want to sell a guy like Will Disley, who I've said, may have already
a little breakout, and then maybe you can get something else.
Done everything that he's going to do for the year. See if you can get a sucker who is looking at points and not the total picture. Stats can be skewed by one big play. Look at that Steeler game. Look at the Monday night Steeler game.
Absolutely.
Vance McDonald stiff arms the heck out of that dude.
He's gonna be the tight end we're looking for.
He runs for that 75-yard touchdown. That looks great. But it's one 75-yard touchdown. He didn't have
consistency.
Where are the other catches? If a guy is only getting one catch, 2 catches in a game, that's not sustainable points.
Absolutely. That is our top 5 for this installment. We will be right back with our old school, new school. Welcome back, everyone. It is time for the old school, new school segment where Mike and I discuss some of the finer points of a particular sport of choice and what we like about the older game to the newer game. This time around, we chose baseball, and we went for a little bit of a homer pick. Us being Yankee fans, there's a great thing that we enjoy. However, our issue is that the playoff system. They play a 162-game season, and we go through all this now, and I personally think that the playoff system should be changed. Mike disagrees with me. Old school versus new school. Mike, take it away.
I disagree with you in part. There is part that needs to be changed. What we disagree on is how the change should take place. But let's start with what the change needs to be. We're both in agreement that in a sport where they play 162 games, all in series, very rarely is there a 2-game series, but once in a while they'll have a 2-game series. They're mostly 3-game series. Every once in a while you'll have a 4-game series. We get to the first round of the playoffs, the most important time of the season, and we have a 1-game playoff.
It's impossible for a whole season to be decided by 1 game. I'm sorry.
That's the point. How are you going to take a season where you're guaranteeing the best teams make the playoffs by having this ridiculously long 162-game season? You get to the end of this really long season, you have the best teams. You take these, you say, okay, these are the two teams that weren't the best of the best, but they're right up there. They're the two best that weren't the best. And you're going to have a flip of a coin decide who's going to be in between those two teams. Because let's face it, that's what a one-game series is. It's a flip of the coin. Anybody can win one game. That's why they play series. That's why the World Series is a series and not a game
series.
Not like unlike the Super Bowl.
Not a game, not a practice. It is the one game that means it all. I think that 7 games is, what do you think? We should go from a 5-game to a 7-7 like they do in basketball, they used to do in basketball? Or should we go to a 3-game playoff series for the wild card? 5-game, 7-game? I personally think it should be earlier in the season. Let's say instead of playing 162 games, we'll play 142 games and leave those 10 games for playoffs that matter towards who's going to make it in the end.
If you're asking me, I'm dropping the season down to around 100 games. But not trying to change the whole regular season. You got to have at least the 3-game series that the regular season is. I personally would like to see it 5. I would like to see it 5 because with the 5-game series, you're almost guaranteed to have the best team. Plus, like I said, throughout the whole rest of the year, you're playing at least 3 games anyway. So the playoffs, what makes the playoffs special is that it's more. It's the epitome of what you're trying to get to.
The intensity of what's going on there. Your 5 best pitchers. You're going to get probably your best hitting, and in those 5 games, yeah, absolutely.
Well, and again, right, and that's the way baseball is set up. Is with you got your 5 starters, a 5-game series. You're going to see at least the top 3 guys, and maybe the opportunity to see all 5. It's not determined by one guy, one game.
Now, do you think that some people would be contrary to that idea and the fact that if you do have those 5 starters or your 3 best pitchers starting in that 3-game series, this is maybe why they do it as one game, because when it comes to the real divisional series and the league championship series, that you don't get that best pitching? How do you think?
Well, see, that's the other part. If you're playing that game, that 1-game play-in, you're obviously going to pitch your best pitcher in that game, which messes up your whole rotation for the next round. So, not only is that 1 game messing things up for, it's just a bad idea. That 1 game is messing up the rotation for the team that does win. It's not putting the best teams with the best opportunity for the best competition. Let's get 2 teams on equal ground and put them out there and see what they can do. May the best team win in advance. That's the way the playoffs should be. That's the way.
So then the 1 game, all or nothing, kind of adheres to your theory there. So 1 game, all or nothing, and then you see how you go from there. Or no, it doesn't work out that way.
Well, no, because in a 1-game, all or nothing, anybody can win that game.
So then the best team you don't think could win?
Well, the best team could win, but the best team doesn't always win 1 game. The best team usually wins
Considering
the
on
series.
the amount of losing percentage in the game of baseball in general, you would think that the odds would play that it probably won't happen.
I mean, and really more than any other sport, baseball is more about the team that's hot at the time. It's not really even always the best team. That's why so many wild card teams have actually won it, because the wild card team is the hot team at that time. So, wild card team, that's why the wild card game is so important. Let's have a wild card series. Let's get the best wild card team, and maybe that team can go on and make some noise in the playoffs. Let's stop making it a coin toss. And, last year, for example, it was Houston and the Yankees in that wild card game. Mm-hmm. The Yankees came this close to winning that game.
That was tough.
They were that close to winning that game. Mm-hmm. Let's face it, the Yankees were not the better team. Houston was the better team. They got lucky. In a series, I don't think there's anybody that would tell you that Houston would not have won a series against the Yankees last year, but it was a game.
It goes also to your point of how teams are on hot streaks. The Yankees barely clinched their spot this year, and because they lost a significant amount of games, should they even have the right to be in the playoffs, considering how poorly they played towards the end of the season? Some people would argue that point with you agreeing, no, it should be just that 1-game playoff.
Well, I like the wild card. Again, I'm new school in that regard. For a guy who generally is old school, I am new school in the regard that I do like the wild card game. It gives teams something to play for. The Yankees were 11 plus games behind Boston when they clinched. I mean, we would have been out of it a long time ago if not for that wild card. The wild card gives the Yankees something to continue to play for. It gives the Yankee fans something to continue to root for. Yeah. You know, it's a long season.
That's why I think it should be better that the playoffs get put in earlier in the season and it's more like basketball style. You know?
Again,
couple extra games, count them differently. That would make for the season not so long, have much more impact to it later on in the season, as opposed to just play and then maybe you'll get in, maybe you won't. I think it would have a difference to do with team rankings and how people play. I don't know.
Oh, no, I'm with you. I definitely feel that baseball starts too soon. I'm sorry. How many snow out games did we have this year? Baseball games should not be snowed out. It's baseball. It's a summer sport. It's the summer pastime. Snow does not play an effect in these games. So we shouldn't be starting the season as early as we said. Start the season a month later. Start the playoffs a month earlier. Again, they called Reggie Jackson Mr. October. They called Derek Jeter Mr. November. Why? Because by the time he did his playoff heroics, his World Series heroics, it was in November. You're not supposed to be playing baseball in November. Come on.
Switch up the season, make it a little bit shorter, change the playoffs. That's what we're looking for because, I don't know, maybe we like shorter condensed games, basketball, baseball, or football, pardon me. So brings up a lot of interesting points. We'll talk about it more when we come back with our next episode. But right now, we're going to be right back with the finisher because I got Mike a little too fired up in this baseball conversation, and he's got a little bit more for us next, coming up right after this.
Finish him!
First and foremost, I'd like to thank Joel for giving me his time. This episode was going to be his finisher, but he was kind enough to allow me to get some pressing issues off of my chest. John Gruden, what are you doing? On behalf of all Raider fans, I ask you, what are you doing? You trade Khalil Mack to the Chicago Bears. Then you go on TV and you ask where our pass rush is. Our pass rush is in Chicago. You trade Khalil Mack to the Chicago Bears. Then you go on TV and you tell people it's hard to find a pass rusher because they don't pass rush in college anymore because of all the bubble screens and quick get the ball out of the quarterback hands. And you know what? Yeah, that part is kind of true. But you know what else? Khalil Mack was a fresh out of college natural pass rusher. Good enough to teach the rest of your young, unnatural pass rushers how to do the job. Khalil Mack was so good at what he did, he created for others, as you're seeing in Chicago. Bruce Irvin didn't have all those sacks last year because Bruce Irvin is such a great pass rusher. Khalil Mack forced them from the left side to roll right into Bruce Irvin. You got your $100 million guaranteed. How are you going to go out and not give the best or one of the best pass rushers in the game his $90 million guaranteed to keep him? Your job is to coach. Reggie McKenzie's job is to GM. Reggie McKenzie has done a great job as GM. The Raiders suffered for years and years and years. The Raiders are tired of suffering. When we signed you, you told us you were going to do everything you could to get Oakland to the Super Bowl before we left Oakland. The Raiders are leaving Oakland in a year, and you told the fans of Oakland you were going to do everything you could to get them to leave them with a good taste in their mouth. And then you trade away our only chance of making the playoffs. Seriously? We've been rebuilding for long enough. Who are you going to get with those 2 first-round picks as good as Khalil Mack? The odds of you getting anybody that good with either of those picks are slim to none because he's a once-in-a-generation talent. John Gruden, step your game up. That's all I got to say, Joel.
Hey, listen, we had the same problem last year with the Giants and Bob McAdoo, and we saw how that ended. Now the Giants are looking a lot better. I hope the same for your Raiders, that, things turn out best for you. Chucky, Spider, Two-Fly Banana, and all his nonsense hopefully will pan out evenly in Raider Town. And that Super Bowl, you Raiders fans are chomping at the bit.
We can only hope. Our goal is to be the New England Patriots, not the Dallas Cowboys. Our goal is excellence.
Let's not get started on
not mediocrity.
Let's not get started on the Dallas Cowboys because that is definitely a tough topic with many a sports fan, as them thinking that they are the best team in football. When who knows? Let's not.
When they mire in mediocrity, we don't want mediocrity.
We do not want mediocrity, and that leads us to the fact that we will be back soon with much more information. We'll be talking about our playoff baseball. We'll be avoiding the mediocrity, and we want you to tell us what you wanted to hear or how you like this episode. Like, comment, subscribe. Big shout out to the folks at LMC TV. In a few weeks, we will definitely be back with more information, and we look forward to you watching us, the Joel and the Genius, and we'll be back soon. Peace.